Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I've never been much of a storyteller, at least not the kind who knows how to make an ugly event sound poetic, but I've been replaying that night over and over again, and I'm starting to think the details matter, if only so somebody, somewhere, can understand how quickly it all happened. It was October 13th, a Wednesday. I remember because the county jail cafeteria had served us overcooked Salisbury steak the night before, and the smell still lingered in the back of my throat. I was seated on the far right bench of the Monroe County Correctional Transport bus, cuffed at the wrists and ankles, the steel chain between them clinking against the floor every time the road curved. We were supposed to be heading south, along State Route 55, cutting through a stretch of rural Illinois farmland before crossing into Missouri. The bus was a Bluebird Vision. You've probably seen them retrofitted for prisoner transport. The windows were reinforced with steel mesh and a second layer of plexiglass inside. The front half had a steel partition with a sliding panel, so the guards could keep an eye on us without giving us the chance to lunge forward. Behind the wheel was Officer Harlan Dorsey, a tall, heavy-set man in his 50s with a white moustache and the kind of slow drawl that made him sound perpetually calm. Riding shotgun was Officer Karen Weller, mid-30s. Buzz-cut hair, eyes that didn't blink much. She had her Glock 22 in a thigh holster and a Taser X 26P on her belt. There were 10 of us inmates in the back. We all wore orange jumpsuits with Monroe County printed in black across the back. The chains made conversation awkward, but it didn't stop Derek Malone, a wiry, talkative guy who claimed he'd once been a mechanic in St. Louis, from rambling about how this was the dumbest route because it had too many blind turns. The road was empty for miles. On both sides stretched nothing but cornfields, the stalks dry and golden under the pale moonlight. Every so often, a farmhouse would appear in the distance, lit faintly by a yard light, but they were few and far between. We'd left the jail around 9:40 p.m. The trip was supposed to take about 2 hours. It didn't. About 40 minutes in, we saw the first sign that something wasn't right. Up ahead, a sedan was stopped sideways across the road, its hazard lights flashing. Officer Dorsey slowed the bus, muttering about how we couldn't exactly swerve with a full load of shackled passengers. Officer Weller picked up the radio mic, called dispatch, and got nothing but static. She tried again. Same result. The sedan's driver's door was open. No one inside. Probably a wreck, Dorsey said, but his voice had lost that easy calm. He stopped the bus about 30 yards back. The headlights illuminated the road in sharp white, bouncing off of bits of glass near the sedan. Weller unholstered her Glock. "Stay put," she told him, stepping down the side steps and walking toward the car. The silence was strange. Normally out here you'd hear crickets, maybe the distant hum of a grain dryer, but it was dead quiet. From the bus window, I saw Weller approach the sedan, look inside, then bend down as if to check something on the ground. That's when she jerked backward, hard, like she'd been yanked off her feet. Dorsey swore and reached for the Remington 870 pump-action shotgun locked in the overhead rack. Before he could step down, something came into the light from the far side of the sedan. It was a man, or at least it used to be. His clothes were shredded, his skin pale grey, his mouth moving in a weird grinding motion. His head twitched like he couldn't keep it steady, and then Weller screamed. It's hard to describe what I saw next without sounding like I'm exaggerating, but she was on the ground, kicking, and the man was over her, moving in short, jerky bursts. Dorsey fired the Remington once 12-gauge buckshot, and the man staggered but didn't fall immediately. Weller scrambled back toward the bus, blood glistening on her left arm. The man kept coming. Dorsey fired again. This time, the man dropped, but not in a normal way. He sort of folded, like a puppet whose strings were cut. Weller hauled herself into the bus, slammed the door lever down, and was breathing so hard it sounded like she'd run a mile. "Drive, now!" Dorsey didn't argue. He jammed the gear shift into reverse, swung the bus around, and floored it back the way we came. We didn't get far. Just as we rounded the next bend, something darted into the road. It was fast, too fast, and when Dorsey swerved to avoid it, the right wheels caught the soft shoulder. At that speed, on that narrow two-lane asphalt, we didn't stand a chance. The bus lurched, fishtailed, and I felt the sickening moment of weightlessness before we tipped. The right side slammed into the ditch with a metallic shriek, glass shattering. The world spun, and my shoulder hit the steel seat frame hard enough to knock the air from my lungs. When we stopped moving, the bus was tilted at a 45-degree angle in the ditch. The front end crumpled into a fence post. The headlights still cut across the cornfield, bright and unnatural against the dry stalks. Dorsey was slumped over the wheel, blood running from a cut on his forehead. Weller was dazed, holding her arm against her chest. We were still chained, still trapped inside. And that's when we heard the sound, faint at first but getting closer. Not footsteps exactly, more like dragging, mixed with a kind of wet, uneven breathing. It came from the cornfield. The stalks rustled as something pushed through, and in the headlight beam, I saw shapes emerging. Not one, not two, half a dozen. Their clothes were torn, their faces slack, their eyes catching the light in a dull reflection. Weller swore under her breath and fumbled for the shotgun. The first one reached the fence, climbing awkwardly over the wire. Its hands were covered in dark stains, its jaw hanging at an unnatural angle. Then, from the back of the bus, I heard Derek whisper, "That ain't right. That ain't right at all." The prisoners weren't quiet anymore. Chains rattled, people shouted, and the smell of panic, sweat, blood, fear filled the air. The steel mesh windows kept the shapes out for now, but I could see them pressing closer. One smacked the glass with the flat of its hand, leaving a streak of something thick and dark. "Keys!" Weller barked, tossing her handcuff key to the nearest inmate, Luis Ortega, a guy who'd been booked for grand theft auto. "If you want to live, you're helping." He didn't argue. The sound of keys clicking in locks went down the row. Dorsey groaned, coming to. He started, but Weller cut him off. "They're not stopping." And she was right. Whatever those things were, they weren't hesitating, weren't talking, weren't slowing down. Somewhere in the darkness, more rustling started. More were coming. We had maybe a minute to decide. Stay in the tilted bus and hope it held, or run into the fields where those things came from. The stale air inside felt heavier by the second, filled with the metallic tang of blood and the low, dull moans seeping in from outside. The bus was a steel cage, but it was also a beacon, headlights still blazing into the corn, a perfect signal to draw in whatever was roaming these fields tonight. Luis freed his own cuffs first, then worked on the rest, his hands moving fast but not sloppy. The chain clattered to the floor when mine came off, and the relief of being able to move my arms and legs was immediate. But it came with a sharper awareness of how bad our situation really was. Every second, the shapes outside pressed closer, their bodies hitting the side panels with a hollow metallic thud that rattled the frame. One of them had already found the rear door handle and was clawing at it without any sense of pain or exhaustion. Weller stayed near the front, the shotgun balanced in her good hand, her wounded arm tucked tight against her body. She was breathing fast, but her eyes kept scanning, weighing options. "We can't stay here," she said without looking back, her tone flat and final. Dorsey, still bleeding from the forehead, wiped his hand across his face and glanced toward the front windshield. The ditch sloped up sharply in front of us, but the fence on the other side was low, barbed wire strung between weathered posts. If we made it over, we'd be in the opposite field, away from the direction the things were coming from. The problem was getting everyone out before the bus was surrounded completely. The front door was half buried in the ditch mud from the impact. That left the emergency exit at the rear and the side push-out windows. The rear exit was already being tested by one of them, its pale hands gripping the handle. Its fingernails were broken, jagged, and left dark smears on the paint every time it missed. Luis pointed at the side window nearest the back. "We shoved this one out. We can drop down into the ditch and move along the fence line," he said. His voice wasn't panicked, but there was an urgency that made everyone nearby start moving toward it. Two of the bigger inmates braced their shoulders and shoved. The locking pins gave with a metallic pop, and the pane swung out on its hinges before snapping off completely. Cold night air rushed in, bringing with it the dry smell of cut corn stalks and something else, an acrid, almost sweet rot that made my stomach turn. The first two went through quickly, dropping the 4 feet into the ditch mud. They stayed low, scanning the field before moving along the embankment toward the front of the bus. I was third, landing hard enough that my knees ached, but adrenaline kept me moving. Above us, Weller fired once through the rear glass at a shape climbing the fence, the sound deafening in the close night air. The target went down, but didn't stay down, crawling forward on its elbows like the legs were just extra weight. The rest followed, one after another. Chains still clinked on some ankles. Luis hadn't had time to free everyone completely, but it didn't matter. We were out. Weller came last, shoving Dorsey ahead of her. The shotgun clutched tight. She hit the ground awkwardly, gritting her teeth as her injured arm jarred on impact. We didn't waste time regrouping. The fence line ahead ran parallel to the road for about 50 yards before it met a gravel access track, the kind farmers use to get equipment to the back end of a property. It wasn't much, but it gave us a direction to follow that didn't involve going deeper into the stalks. The ditch water sucked at our shoes as we moved, the sound of it masking the approach of anything following. I kept glancing back, and each time I saw more of them breaking through the corn and dropping into the road, where the bus sat like a wounded animal. The steel shell bought us maybe another 2 minutes before they figured out which way we'd gone. We reached the access track and hauled ourselves up onto it, shoes grinding on the loose stone. Off to the left, a row of white propane tanks sat beside a low shed with a corrugated metal roof. Beyond that was darkness, but the faint orange glow on the horizon suggested a small town in that direction. It could have been a grain elevator's lights or a gas station, but either way it meant structures, maybe phones, maybe vehicles. Dorsey slowed, breathing hard, pressing a hand against his head wound. "There's a crossing up ahead," he muttered, pointing toward the glow. "County map. This track runs right to Miller's Crossing." Luis glanced over his shoulder at the sound behind us. It wasn't close enough to see yet, but the way it rose and fell, like a dozen people breathing out of sync, made it clear they were coming. "Then we keep moving," Luis said. "No stopping, no turning back." The group thinned into a line along the track, the gravel crunching underfoot. My jumpsuit was already damp from the ditch, and the October air made the wet fabric stick to my skin. Every few seconds, a dry stalk from the bordering cornfield snapped somewhere off to the side. We weren't alone in here. The shed came into view faster than expected. Just a single farm outbuilding with rusted hinges and a padlock that was more rust than steel. Weller didn't hesitate. She fired once into the lock, the buckshot blowing it apart, then kicked the door wide enough for us to slip inside. The smell hit first. Fertilizer, old oil, and dust. Hanging on the back wall were 2 pitchforks, a coil of heavy rope, and a battered aluminum baseball bat. On the bench sat a red fuel can, about half full, and an old .30, 30 lever-action rifle with a box of cartridges beside it. Dorsey grabbed the bat. Luis took the rifle, checking the chamber before pocketing the cartridges. Someone else, Malone, snatched one of the pitchforks and gripped it like he'd been born with it in his hands. It wasn't much, but it was something. We didn't linger. Weller made sure the group moved on, taking the lead along the track again. The glow ahead grew brighter with each bend, the faint outline of silos now visible against the sky. It was a town, small and spread out, but there were shapes moving in the streets, not cars, not people moving normally. I didn't want to believe it at first. Maybe it was the distance, or the way the sodium lights made everything look off color. But the more I stared, the clearer it became. They were like the ones we'd seen in the cornfield, Staggering, stopping, starting again, not looking around, not talking, just moving. We slowed without meaning to. Behind us, the sound from the corn was closer now, joined by the faint metallic creak of the bus's frame giving way. Ahead of us was the glow of a town that might already be lost. The gravel under our shoes seemed louder in the still air, every step feeling like it might give away our position. Even the wind had died down, as if the fields themselves were holding their breath. Miller's Crossing was small, maybe 1,000 residents on a good day, but the closer we got, the more obvious it became that something had gone very wrong here. The silos that had looked clean and silver from a distance were streaked with dark smears, and a pickup truck sat abandoned halfway across the main street, its driver's door hanging open. There were no engine sounds, no TVs, no dogs barking from porches, just the faint, irregular scrape of movement echoing between buildings. Weller kept us low along the fence line as we approached the edge of town, leading us toward a patch of shadow behind a row of grain bins. The light from the sodium street lamps pooled in uneven circles, leaving plenty of blind spots between them. Shapes wandered in and out of those spots, slow, uneven silhouettes that didn't look like anyone heading home for the night. Some swayed in place as if they'd forgotten what they were doing. Others moved in short, abrupt bursts, like a needle skipping on a warped record. We huddled in the shadow of the bins, the smell of grain dust and rusted metal filling the air. From here, we could see the short stretch of Main Street that ran through the centre of town. On one side was Hobart's general store, its windows shattered and a display rack tipped over inside. Across from it, the Miller's Crossing volunteer fire station stood with its bay doors wide open, a single Pierce Sabre fire engine still parked inside. That detail stuck with me. The truck hadn't been taken, which meant either no one had time to use it or no one was left who could. Dorsey crouched against the bin wall, clutching the baseball bat in one hand and holding a rag to his forehead with the other. His breathing was shallow but steady. Weller scanned the street, her eyes moving from one pool of light to the next. She wasn't looking for a clear path, so much as the least dangerous one. Luis knelt beside her, the .30 rifle balanced across his knee, thumb brushing over the lever without actually cycling it. From somewhere deeper in town came a noise unlike the others. It was sharper, higher, a sudden burst of movement followed by the unmistakable sound of metal striking pavement. Everyone froze, listening. The silhouettes on the street didn't react, but that only made it worse, because whatever had made the noise wasn't part of the aimless wandering. The decision had to be made. Moving past the town entirely meant finding a long route around in open country, with no guarantee of shelter. Going through might give us supplies, food, water, maybe a vehicle, but it would also put us in the same streets as whatever was still moving out there. Weller finally spoke, her voice low but certain. We cut through. We don't linger. Anything we grab fast. She didn't wait for agreement, just pointed toward a narrow alley between the general store and the post office. It was dark, littered with broken crates and a tipped trash bin, but it led to the next block where she thought we could loop around toward the western outskirts. We moved in a tight line, keeping to the shadows. The air here was different, warmer, heavier, and carrying that same sickly sweet smell we'd caught in the cornfield. My skin prickled as I realized it wasn't fading. It was getting stronger the deeper we went. Something about the buildings made the sound carry strangely. Every footstep sounding too close, every breath louder than it should be. Halfway down the alley, a figure came into view at the far end. It stood still at first, back turned, head slightly tilted toward the wall. Its hands hung loosely at its sides, fingers twitching in small, irregular movements. We froze, but the pause didn't last long. Something in the way it moved when it finally turned told us this was not someone who could be reasoned with. The head rotated too far before the shoulders followed, the mouth working in silent, uneven jerks. Luis was already raising the rifle when Weller hissed for him to hold. Firing here would echo through the whole block. Instead, Malone stepped forward, the pitchfork held low. He didn't charge, just walked until the figure noticed and started toward him in a stuttering, uneven lurch. The moment it got close enough, he drove the pitchfork forward with both hands, the tines punching through with a wet, muffled resistance. The figure went limp instantly, but Malone didn't pull the fork free right away. He held it there, breathing hard, before finally wrenching it back. We stepped over it, careful not to look too closely. The ground ahead was scattered with old leaves, hiding uneven patches of pavement that threatened to trip us with every step. The alley opened onto a side street lined with angled parking spots, most of them empty. 2 vehicles remained. A rust-red Ford Explorer with the driver's side window smashed in, and a blue Chevy S10 pickup with a bed full of plastic storage tubs. Luis jogged ahead to check the pickup. The keys weren't in it, but the driver's door was unlocked. Inside, the bench seat was covered in scattered maps, a half-empty bottle of water, and a flashlight. He tossed the water to me and kept the flashlight, clicking it on just long enough to check under the dash. The ignition cylinder was intact, which meant we'd need keys or hot wiring. He shut the door quietly, glancing down the street. The sound behind us had changed. It wasn't the distant shuffle of a few wandering figures anymore. It was a heavier, uneven trampling, and it was coming from the direction of the alley. Weller's voice was calm but urgent now. "Move! We're not stopping again until we're out the other side." We cut across the street and slipped between 2 darkened houses, their yards overgrown, kids' toys lying in the grass like they'd been dropped mid-play. On the far side was another open stretch leading toward the west edge of town. The glow of street lamps thinned here, and the silhouettes were fewer, but the sound from behind hadn't lessened. If anything, it was picking up, as if the noise we'd made was pulling more of them from side streets and dark corners. I risked one glance over my shoulder. In the dim light, maybe 20 shapes were in the open now, moving with that strange combination of aimlessness and sudden bursts of speed. We'd seen only scattered ones before. This was a group, and they were closing the distance. The strange, irregular way they moved made it hard to judge exactly how fast they could be, but I knew they'd be on us soon if we didn't put something solid between them and us. The last stretch of Miller's Crossing, before the open farmland, wasn't much more than 2 parallel rows of 1-story houses, most with peeling paint and sagging porches. A narrow asphalt road cut between them, leading to the county's western access road and, hopefully, a path out of here. The problem was that the road was blocked about 50 yards ahead by a stalled International 4900 dump truck, its hazard lights still flashing in the darkness. The amber strobes pulsed against the houses, throwing the shadows of their sagging eaves across the street in a rhythm that made the figures behind us harder to track. We moved quickly now, the group instinctively stretching into a staggered line along the front yards to avoid bottlenecking. Weller took the lead, cutting straight toward a detached garage at the far end of the block. She'd spotted the reflection of chrome in the driveway. A pickup, maybe. Louise kept pace beside her, the rifle ready, while Malone and 2 others watched the rear with what little they had: a pitchfork, the aluminum bat, and a length of pipe one of them had pulled from a fence rail. The pickup turned out to be a late-model Ford F-150 dark green, with the rear wheels up on ramps and the hood unlatched. Someone had been working on it recently. The oil pan sat open beneath, a half-full drain pan beside it. The keys dangled from the ignition, almost absurdly. Weller slid into the driver's seat and twisted them. The starter cranked, coughed once, but didn't catch. She tried again, pumping the accelerator, but all she got was the same grinding churn. Without oil, even if it started, it wouldn't last long before seizing up. We didn't have time to argue. The noise from the truck's starter echoed down the street, and shapes in the distance immediately altered their course, angling toward the sound. Luis muttered something under his breath and scanned the block for alternatives. That's when I spotted it. A boxy, white Chevrolet Express van parked half a block down, nose pointed toward the open road. Its front tires looked solid, the body was intact, and the driver's side was facing us. We ran for it, scattering between the yards. The air smelled faintly of smoke now, probably from somewhere deeper in town. But the haze was thin enough that it didn't slow us. The van's driver's door was unlocked, and the inside was cluttered with contractor gear, extension cords, a dented thermos, a coil of electrical cable. The keys were still in the cup holder, and this time, when Weller turned them, the engine rumbled to life without protest. The sound, though, was like a dinner bell. The group from the alley wasn't the only one moving through these streets. From the corner to our right, another cluster appeared, maybe 10 or 12, stepping into the wash of the street lamp. Their faces were pale under the sodium light, mouths half open, eyes glassy and fixed. One of them broke into that same erratic sprint we'd seen before, covering the gap between streetlights in seconds. "Load up!" Weller's voice was clipped and sharp. Dorsey climbed in first, still clutching the bat, followed by Luis with the rifle across his lap. The others piled into the back, shoving tools and cables aside. I took the passenger seat, slamming the door just as Malone yanked the sliding side door shut. The moment it latched, Weller dropped the van into gear and floored it. The tyres spun on the loose gravel patch at the end of the driveway before catching on the asphalt. The van lurched forward, the engine growling as we shot down the road toward the county access. The dump truck ahead loomed closer. Weller angled us toward the narrow gap between its rear bumper and a leaning mailbox post. The side mirror clipped the post with a sharp crack, but we made it through without losing speed. The open road beyond the town limits felt like a relief at first. No houses, no parked cars, just the dark ribbon of asphalt stretching west. But that feeling didn't last. In the headlights, the road was littered with signs of movement. Shredded clothing, streaks of something dark, and here and there, the hunched silhouettes of more figures in the fields on either side. They didn't charge the van, but their heads turned as we passed, tracking us with slow, deliberate movements. We kept going for several miles without speaking. The van's engine hummed steadily, and the only other sound was the occasional rattle from the tools in the back. The further we got from town, the darker it became, the only light coming from our headlights and the pale glow of the moon above. At some point, the road narrowed and dipped between two steep embankments lined with trees. That's when we saw it. Another vehicle across the road. This time, a Ford Crown Victoria with both front doors open and its headlights pointed straight at us. Weller slowed but didn't stop entirely. The windshield was starred on the passenger side, the driver's seat empty. As we rolled past, I saw what looked like a sheriff's department badge, still pinned to the driver's jacket, lying crumpled on the shoulder. The grass beside the car was flattened, leading into the trees. None of us said anything, but everyone was thinking the same thing. Whatever had started in the fields had reached farther than we wanted to believe. If there'd been a containment effort, it wasn't here anymore. We drove until the fuel gauge dropped below a quarter tank. Out here, gas stations weren't every few miles. They were spaced for people who planned ahead. The map Luis had pulled from the van's glove compartment showed the next marked station was in Harriston, about 12 miles west. It wasn't far, but with no way of knowing what we'd find there, each mile felt longer. Somewhere ahead, faint and almost lost in the rumble of the van, came a different sound. A deep, uneven thudding, like wood striking wood. We topped a rise and saw it, a cluster of lights on the road ahead, the glow of a gas station canopy, and the silhouettes of several people moving under it. But they weren't filling their cars. They were standing still, facing the same direction, and as we drew closer, they all began to turn toward us in perfect, unnatural unison. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.